You're just an orphan. 5 words, said out loud, in front of everyone. The cafeteria went quiet for half a second, and then the laughter came. And nobody stopped it. Nobody ever stopped it. Elijah Carter was 11 years old, black, and completely alone in the world. No mother, no father, no family coming. Just a worn-out white t-shirt, a broken shoestring tied in a double knot, and a book he used as a wall between himself and everything that wanted to break him. He sat in that corner every single day and took it. Because he had learned, the hard way, the only way orphans learn anything, that fighting back just made the wound deeper. Ryan stood over him like he owned the air in the room, that black cap tilted forward, performing cruelty for an audience that laughed because they were afraid to be next. "Where's your mom? Where's your dad?" Ryan said slowly, savoring every word. "Oh, right. You don't have either." Elijah didn't move, didn't cry, didn't give him anything. But what nobody in that cafeteria knew, what nobody could have possibly imagined, was what that black boy was carrying around his neck beneath that worn-out shirt. A ring. And a name. And somewhere across that city, on the 12th floor of a building that kept its secrets well, a man in a charcoal suit had just answered a phone call that would change both of their lives forever. He was not a good man. He was not a safe man. But he was about to become something nobody saw coming. A father. Before starting the story, comment down below where you are watching from and what time it is there. If stories of karma, love, and hidden truths move you, leave a like. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and click Join to become a member and help our channel. You're just an orphan. The words hit the air like a stone thrown at glass. Sharp, deliberate, designed to shatter. And in the crowded chaos of that school cafeteria, with the smell of overcooked macaroni hanging thick, and the screech of chairs dragging against linoleum, nobody moved to stop them. Nobody ever did. Elijah Carter sat at the corner table, the one closest to the wall and furthest from everything else, with a book open beside a tray he hadn't touched yet. His eyes were steady, focused, the kind of focused that belongs to someone who has learned to build walls out of words and pages. He was 11 years old, and he already knew that silence was sometimes the only armor a person could afford. Ryan Kowalski stood above him like he owned the air in the room. 13, broad-shouldered for his age, wearing that black, flat-brim cap like it was a crown. 2 boys flanked him on either side, grinning the way people grin when someone else is about to get hurt and they're grateful it isn't them. Ryan pulled the earbud from Elijah's ear with a deliberate snap. Not violent enough to be punished, just violent enough to be felt. "There's a list in the bathroom," Ryan said, loud enough for the nearby tables to hear, loud enough to perform. "Kids nobody wanted. Your name's at the top." Elijah did not look up. He turned a page. "Hey." Ryan leaned closer. "I'm talking to you, orphan boy. Where's your mom? Where's your dad?" He let the question sit in the air, then answered it himself with a slow, satisfied smile. "Oh, right. You don't have either. You're just an orphan. That's all you are." The laughter came in waves. Not everyone laughed. Some kids stared at their food like it had suddenly become very interesting. But enough of them did. Enough to fill the room. Enough to make the silence that Elijah kept feel enormous and exposed. He closed the book. He breathed. And he did nothing. Because he had learned, through years of doing something, that doing something always made it worse. What nobody in that cafeteria could have known, what nobody would have believed if told, was what Elijah carried around his neck beneath that worn white t-shirt. A thin cord of brown leather. A man's ring, heavy and cold against his sternum. His mother had pressed it into his small hand the week before she died, when he was 6 years old and did not yet understand what it meant to lose someone completely. "Keep this," she had whispered. Her voice was already thin by then, stretched out like fabric worn too many times. "It belonged to someone who didn't know. Promise me you'll keep it." He had promised. He always kept his promises. Later that night, in the room he shared with 5 other boys at St. Augustine's Home for Children, where the radiator knocked all night and the ceiling had a water stain shaped roughly like the state of Florida, Elijah lay on his back and held the ring up toward the pale glow coming through the window. The metal caught the light in a way that made it look almost warm. He had found a name once, buried in his file at the administrative office, in a letter his mother had written and never sent, folded so many times the creases had become tears. He'd read it by flashlight, alone, and put it back exactly as he found it. He'd never told anyone. The name was Kwon Sung-tin. He didn't know what it meant. He didn't know what language it came from. Not fully. Not then. He only knew that his mother had written it the way people write things they're afraid to say out loud. Carefully. With pressure. Like she was trying to make sure the letters didn't disappear. He closed his fist around the ring. Across the city, in an office on the 12th floor of a building that had nothing to do with what happened inside it, a phone rang twice and was answered on the 3rd. The man who answered did not say hello. He listened. And then, for the first time in a very long time, something moved behind those black, still eyes. The dossier was thin. That was the first thing Sung-jin noticed when his investigator slid it across the desk. Not the photographs inside, not the name typed at the top, but how thin it was. As if 11 years of a child's life could be compressed into something a man could hold with 2 fingers. He held it with both hands. The office around him was the kind of quiet that doesn't happen by accident. No street noise reached the 12th floor. The 2 men stationed near the door had learned years ago not to breathe loudly in this room. His assistant, a woman who had worked for him for 9 years and had never once asked a personal question, stood near the window with her hands folded and her eyes directed somewhere neutral. Everyone in Sung-jin's world had learned the same lesson eventually, that his silences were not empty. They were the heaviest thing in any room he occupied. He opened the dossier. The photograph was a school picture, the kind taken every year against a pale blue background, with the subject told to sit straight and smile. The boy in the photograph had not quite managed the smile. What he had managed instead was something more honest. A stillness, a composure, a look in his honey-colored eyes that did not belong to a child who had been treated gently by the world. Sung-jin looked at that face for a long time. He knew, before the DNA confirmation, before the investigator's careful explanation of dates and cross-referenced records and the letter Keisha had written and never sent, he knew the way people know things they have spent years refusing to think about directly. Through the side of the eye. through the weight of an absence that never quite explained itself. He had loved Keisha Carter in the only way he had known how to love anything back then. Completely, and in secret. She was the one person who had ever spoken to him like the danger he carried wasn't the most important thing about him. They had existed in a small, private world for 2 years, and then the clan had required something of him that private worlds could not survive. He had made a choice. He had believed, because it was easier to believe, that she would be fine. That they would both be fine. That the absence of a thing was not the same as the loss of it. He had been wrong about that. He had been wrong about most of it. He closed the dossier, set it flat on the desk, pressed his palm against the cover for a moment that no one in the room acknowledged. Then he said, very quietly, "Take me to him." The next morning arrived at St. Augustine's the way all mornings did, with noise before light, with the smell of powdered eggs from the kitchen below, with the sound of the old pipes groaning as the building remembered itself. Elijah was already awake. He was usually already awake. Sleep, for him, had always been a negotiation rather than a surrender. He was sitting on the floor of the common room with the History of Asian Empires open across his knees when Ms. Tate, the youngest of the overnight staff, told him he was wanted in the administrative office. She said it the way people say things when they've been told not to say anything more than necessary. Elijah marked his page. He was careful about that. The hallway to Walsh's office was long and smelled of the cleaning solution they used on the floors every Tuesday. Elijah walked it the way he walked most things, steadily, without hurry, watching. He noticed the 2 men in dark suits standing outside the office door before he reached them. He noticed that they noticed him. He noticed that neither of them moved, but that something in their posture shifted slightly, the way a door shifts when someone on the other side takes hold of the handle. He pushed open the door. Walsh was behind her desk, but she was not behaving like someone behind her desk. She was standing slightly to the side of it, one hand resting on the surface as if she needed the support, her pearl bracelet clicking softly against the wood. Her face was arranged into the expression she used for donors and inspectors, composed, warm at the edges, performing competence. But her eyes were doing something different. Her eyes were doing the thing eyes do when the body knows something the face hasn't admitted yet. The man in the charcoal suit stood near the window. He was tall in a way that had nothing to do with height. The light came through the blinds in pale strips and crossed the side of his face, catching the line of the scar above his left eyebrow, catching the edge of the tattoos that rose from his collar and climbed the right side of his neck. He was looking at Elijah with an expression that was not quite readable, but was not empty either. It was the expression of someone doing something irrevocable and knowing it. Elijah stopped in the doorway. He did not look at Walsh. He did not look at the suited men behind him. He looked at the man by the window, and the man by the window looked back, and for a moment that lasted longer than moments usually do, neither of them said anything at all. Then Sung Jin spoke, low, deliberate, each word placed carefully. "You are Elijah Carter." It was not quite a question. Elijah reached beneath his shirt. His fingers found the leather cord, the familiar weight of the ring. He pulled it over his head, held it out across the space between them in his open palm. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Sung Jin crossed the room in 4 steps. He looked down at the ring. The muscles in his jaw went tight. His hand came up slowly and he took it. Not quickly, not with the decisiveness he used for everything else in his life, but carefully. The way you take something you are afraid of dropping. From behind her desk, Walsh cleared her throat. Neither of them looked at her. Walsh tried again. She had a particular way of inserting herself into silences. A small sound first, a breath, then the voice arriving with its practiced warmth, calibrated for exactly this kind of situation. She had managed difficult conversations before. She had managed grieving children and absent relatives, and government inspectors with clipboards and expressions of concern. She was, by her own private estimation, very good at managing. Mr. she began. Kwon. Sungjin did not turn around. My name is Kwon Sungjin. Mr. Kwon. She smoothed the front of her blazer with one hand. I understand this must be an emotional moment, and I want you to know that St. Augustine's is fully committed to the well-being of every child in our care. Elijah has been with us for 5 years, and in that time we have worked very hard to provide him with stability and structure, and I would like you to stop talking. He said it without volume, without heat, the way someone states a fact about the weather. Walsh stopped talking. Sungjin finally turned from the window. He reached into the interior pocket of his jacket and produced a folded set of documents, which he placed on the desk in front of her without ceremony. She looked down at them the way people look at things they already know are going to be a problem. DNA confirmation, he said. Filed 3 days ago. The legal process is already in motion. My attorney will contact this office by end of business today. The boy will come with me while the formal proceedings complete. He paused. This is not a request. Walsh's hand tightened on the edge of the desk. She looked at Elijah, deployed that smile, the one she saved for audiences, and her voice shifted into something softer, something designed to sound like protection. Elijah, sweetheart, you don't have to go anywhere with people you don't know. There are procedures in place for exactly this kind of situation, and your safety and comfort are our absolute— Ms. Walsh. Elijah's voice was quiet and even. He was looking at her with those honey-colored eyes that missed nothing. You told Miss Tate last spring that I was a difficult placement because of my attitude. I heard you through the window of your office. You were talking to a couple who came to look at the younger kids. He paused. You said some children just don't inspire confidence in prospective families. The room went very still. Walsh's smile did not disappear exactly. It simply stopped meaning anything. Elijah picked up his backpack from the floor beside the chair where he'd set it. He slung it over one shoulder. He looked at Sungjin. Really looked at him. The way he'd looked at that ring for 5 years, searching for something he didn't quite have language for yet. I don't know you, Elijah said. It was honest. It was also not an objection. No, Sungjin said. You don't. But I know that ring. Yes. A beat passed between them. Outside the window, the sounds of the school morning continued. Distant voices, a ball bouncing somewhere, a teacher calling a name. The ordinary world, proceeding without awareness of what was shifting inside this room. Okay, Elijah said. And that was enough. The house was the kind of thing Elijah had seen in movies and then decided to stop watching because they made the world feel like a lie. It had a hallway that went on longer than the entire first floor of St. Augustine's. It had a kitchen with a refrigerator that dispensed water from the door. It had a room. His room, Sungjin's assistant had said. Your room. With a window that looked out over a garden, and a desk that had never been used, and shelves that were empty and waiting. Elijah stood in the center of it for a long time. He didn't unpack immediately. He sat on the edge of the bed, which was firmer and wider than anything he'd ever slept on, and he placed the ring on the nightstand, and he looked at it, and he thought about his mother in the careful way he always thought about her, like handling something that could still cut if you weren't paying attention. She had known who Sungjin was, or at least what he was, and she had kept the ring anyway, had pressed it into his hand like a map to somewhere she couldn't take him herself. He didn't know if that was brave or desperate, or both. He was beginning to understand that most important things were both. Sung-jin appeared in the doorway that evening without knocking, then seemed to reconsider and knocked on the open door instead. Elijah looked up. The man who had made grown men stop breathing with a glance was standing in a doorway holding 2 cups of tea, and he looked, for just a moment, like someone who had never been more uncertain of anything in his life. "May I come in?" Sung-jin asked. Elijah considered this with the seriousness it deserved. "Yeah," he said. Sung-jin entered. He looked at the chair at the desk, then at the floor, and then he sat on the floor with his back against the wall, the charcoal suit jacket folded over his knee, the silver watch catching the lamplight, and he held one of the cups out toward Elijah without explanation. Elijah climbed down from the bed and sat on the floor across from him. They drank tea in silence for a while. The house settled around them, making its quiet noises. "Are you afraid of me?" Sung-jin asked. Elijah thought about it honestly, which was the only way he knew how to think about things. "No," he said, "but I think other people are. And sometimes that's the same problem from different directions." Something moved in Sung-jin's expression, something old and recognized and not quite prepared for. "Your mother said things like that," he said. He had not planned to say it. He could tell, by the way the words arrived, that they had come from somewhere he didn't usually allow access. Elijah heard this. He heard the way the sentence cost something. He set his cup down carefully. "Tell me about her," he said. And Sung-jin, who had not spoken Keisha Carter's name aloud in 11 years, who had buried the memory of her beneath the weight of everything the clan had required him to become, opened his mouth and found, to his own astonishment, that the words were still there, that they had been waiting, that they came slowly at first, then with more ease, like a door opening on a room that had been sealed too long, releasing air that was stale and precious at the same time. He talked for a long time. Elijah listened with both eyes open and both ears clear, the way he listened to everything that mattered, completely, without interruption, storing every word in that deep, careful place where he kept the things he intended to keep forever. Outside, Chicago moved through its night, indifferent, enormous, unaware. Inside, something that had been broken for 11 years was beginning, with great difficulty and no guarantee of success, to try to remember the shape it was supposed to hold. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday. Walsh found it on her desk when she came in at 8:15, beneath her coffee cup, as if it had always been there. It was plain and white and had no return address. Inside was a single document, 43 pages, tabbed and indexed, compiled with the kind of thoroughness that suggested significant resources and significant patience. An audit, complete, sourced, and devastating. She read the first 6 pages standing up. Then she sat down. Then she read the rest without moving. The document detailed everything. The diversion of state funds allocated for children's educational materials, redirected across 4 fiscal years into operational accounts that served purposes the state had never approved. The manipulation of adoption placement reports, families with lower financial profiles quietly deprioritized, their paperwork delayed, their calls unreturned, while donor-adjacent households moved through the process with remarkable efficiency. The maintenance requests filed and never fulfilled. The incident reports summarized in ways that made problems disappear on paper while they continued in the hallways and the dormitories and the cafeteria, where children ate food that cost a fraction of what the budget claimed. At the bottom of the final page, where a signature or a letterhead might have been, there was only a single typed line. The children who remain deserve what the system promised them. Walsh sat at her desk for a long time after she finished reading. The pearl bracelet clicked against the wood as her hand trembled slightly. She was not a woman who trembled. She had built an entire career on not trembling. But the document in her hands was not the kind of thing that could be managed or softened or redirected. It was the kind of thing that ended chapters. She was placed on administrative leave within 48 hours. The state investigation that followed was not brief, and it was not gentle, and it did not stop at her office door. Sung-jin was never mentioned. No document bore his name. No record connected the audit to any individual or organization. When his attorney was asked, in an indirect and carefully worded inquiry some weeks later, whether his client had any knowledge of the matter, the attorney smiled pleasantly and said that his client operated several legitimate import businesses and had no involvement in social services administration whatsoever. The attorney then changed the subject. Sung-jin, when Elijah brought it up, quietly on a Sunday morning, sliding the tablet across the breakfast table with the news article pulled up, did not look at the screen. He poured his coffee. He set the pot down. He looked out the window at the garden where the first cold of the season had begun to pull the color from the leaves. "You did that," Elijah said. It was not an accusation. It was an observation, delivered with the precision of someone who had spent his entire life reading situations that other people missed. Sung-jin was quiet for a moment. "I don't know what you're referring to," he said. A pause. "But if someone did," he continued, still looking at the garden, "it would be because certain situations exist that should not exist. And because people in positions of trust who use that trust as a tool against the people they were trusted to protect." He stopped, set his coffee cup down. "They should face consequences. That's not complicated." Elijah looked at him for a long time. "She had 40 kids in that building," Elijah said. "Still does. They're still there." "I know. So whatever happened to Walsh, it needs to actually help them, not just remove her." Sung-jin turned from the window then. He looked at his son, this 11-year-old boy in a too large sweatshirt sitting at a breakfast table that still felt unfamiliar to both of them. And something in his face settled. Not softened. Settled. Like something finding its correct position after a long time of being slightly wrong. "The audit included recommendations," Sung-jin said. "Specific. Funded. There are people whose job it now is to make sure those recommendations are implemented." He paused. "The children who are still there will not be left as they were." Elijah nodded slowly. He pulled the tablet back. He closed the article. "Okay," he said. It was the same word he had used in Walsh's office, but it meant something different now. The first time it had meant, "I will try." This time it meant, "I believe you." The school week that followed was unremarkable in most of the ways that school weeks are unremarkable. Classes, hallways, the particular social ecosystem of a public school that has more children than resources and more noise than resolution. Elijah moved through it the way he always had. Observantly, quietly, with the book under his arm and the single earbud in, and the careful posture of someone who has learned to take up exactly the space he is given and no more. Ryan Kowalski did not approach him. This was noticed by people who noticed things, which in a school is most people, because schools are, in fact, very attentive social environments when the subject of attention is power and its movement. Ryan had always derived his authority from the performance of it, the audience, the laugh track, the reliable presence of a target who could be counted on to absorb the impact and remain in place. Without that, the performance had nowhere to land. And Ryan, who was 13 and had learned cruelty from someone who had never explained why they were teaching it, found that he did not know what to do with his hands when he was not using them to point at someone. He didn't apologize. Elijah did not expect him to. Apology requires a kind of self-awareness that arrives, if it arrives at all, much later. In a car alone, or at 3 in the morning, or in the middle of an ordinary moment years from now, when something small and unrelated opens a door that was never properly closed. What Ryan did instead was nothing. And sometimes nothing is its own kind of answer. Elijah, for his part, did not spend time thinking about Ryan Kowalski. He had other things to think about. He had a history book with chapters that needed verification. He had a father who sat on floors and drank tea and spoke haltingly about a woman they had both loved and lost in different ways at different times. He had a room with empty shelves that were slowly, shelf by shelf, becoming full. On a Friday afternoon, he came home and found Sung Jin already there. Unusual, because Sung Jin's hours were unpredictable and often long. He was in the main room, jacket off, the silver watch on the table, reading something in Korean with the focused expression he wore when he was in his own world entirely. Elijah dropped his bag at the door. He pulled out the History of Asian Empires. He walked in and sat on the couch beside his father without asking, close enough that their shoulders were nearly touching. Sung Jin looked over at the book, then at Elijah. "There's a chapter," Elijah said, "on the Korean peninsula, Goryeo period. I want to know if it's right." Sung Jin looked at the book for a moment with an expression that was difficult to name. Something layered, something that moved through several rooms before settling. He reached over and took the book. He found the chapter. He began to read. Then he began to talk. First about what the book had wrong, which was several things, and then about what it had missed entirely, which was more. His voice changed when he talked about history. It lost the economy it usually had. It became something fuller, something that moved differently. And Elijah sat beside him and listened with his whole self the way he always listened to things that mattered. At some point, Elijah's eyes grew heavy. He didn't fight it. He had spent so many years sleeping lightly, alertly, with one part of himself always on guard against the sounds of a dormitory full of other people's restlessness, that the simple act of being tired in a safe place was still new enough to be astonishing. He slept. Sung Jin stopped mid-sentence when he felt the weight shift against his arm. He looked down at his son, this boy who had his mother's directness and his own silences, and something entirely his own that belonged to neither of them and would take years to fully understand. And he did not move. He stayed exactly where he was. The city moved outside the windows, indifferent and enormous and full of its own noise. Inside the room, the lamp threw a warm circle of light across the two of them, and the book lay open across Sung Jin's knee, and the silver watch ticked on the table, and the ring that had traveled from his hand to Keisha's, and from Keisha's to Elijah's, and finally back, sat on the end table across the room where Elijah had placed it that morning. Sungjin looked at the ceiling. He had made a great many decisions in his life. Some of them had been necessary. Some of them he had told himself were necessary, which was not the same thing, and he had always known the difference, even when he pretended not to. He had built an empire on the willingness to make hard choices and not flinch from their consequences. He had flinched from this one. For 11 years, he had flinched from it. And a boy had grown up in a building with a water-stained ceiling, and a woman with a pearl bracelet who didn't believe he inspired confidence. And he had eaten bad food and been called Orphan Boy in a cafeteria while everyone watched and no one moved. Sungjin was not a man who apologized. It was not in his vocabulary in any language he spoke. But sitting in that room with his son's weight against his arm, he made a decision that was quieter and more permanent than any he had made before. He would not flinch again. Whatever Elijah needed him to be, whatever shape a father was supposed to hold that Sungjin had never been taught and had never allowed himself to learn, he would figure it out. Not perfectly, not without difficulty, but consistently and without retreat, and for as long as he was given the time to do it. He reached over carefully with his free hand. He picked up the book from his knee. He found the page where he had stopped. And he kept reading, quietly, in the lamplight, while his son slept beside him, and the city carried on outside, and the night came in slowly the way nights do, without announcement, without apology, simply arriving and settling, and becoming the thing that holds you until the morning finds you again. Elijah waited 5 years holding a ring that belonged to someone who didn't know he existed. And when that man finally showed up, he didn't come with excuses. He came with action. But here's what nobody talks about. Keisha, Elijah's mother, loved a man who never truly chose her. She carried that ring, that secret, that hope, until she couldn't anymore. If any part of her story feels familiar, if you've ever held on to something that should have been given back to you long ago, this is for you. The Woman He Can't Manipulate 30-Day Reset was created for women who are done explaining their worth to people committed to misunderstanding them. It's not about becoming cold. It's about becoming harder to confuse. 30 days, 4 phases. 1 return to yourself. Scan the QR code on your screen right now, or check the link in the description or the pinned comment below. Your reset is waiting. If this story moved you, stop for a moment and reflect. Have you ever been told, by a person, by a system, or by silence itself, that you were not enough, that you didn't belong, that no one was coming for you? And have you ever witnessed someone being dismissed, laughed at, or left behind, and said nothing? Not because you didn't care, but because you didn't know if your voice would matter? Tell us your experiences and feelings in the comments. We read them all. And if you believe in stories about belonging, quiet justice, and the kind of love that arrives late but never too late, leave a like. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and click Join to become a part of our community and help the channel.